China has moved in a way that could reshape the entire global balance of power, and the stage for this shift was not New York, Brussels, or Washington, it was Kuala Lumpur. There, under Beijing's leadership, more than 20 countries came together. At first glance, it might have looked like just another summit, another round of formal speeches and stage photographs. But in reality, something far more significant was happening. This was not ceremony or protocol. It was the construction of a new bloc, an alliance pulling Southeast Asia, the Gulf states, and China itself into a single, powerful orbit. And together, this emerging coalition represents not only more than $25 trillion in combined economic weight, but also the collective force of over 2 billion people. That is not just a regional partnership. It's a potential counterbalance to the very system that has underpinned Western dominance for decades. For years, BRICS was seen as the biggest challenge to the West's grip on global affairs. It represented an alternative, but one often weakened by internal rivalries and divergent national interests. What is being built now, however, goes beyond the promise of BRICS. This is something deeper, something with stronger foundations. It is already responsible for more than half of the world's economic growth, and that means real, tangible leverage over trade, energy, technology, and investment. Leverage that impacts every single country on the planet. While Washington remains mired in endless disputes over tariffs, party politics, and budget battles, Beijing is laying down concrete bridges, both figurative and literal. China's high-speed rail projects in Indonesia, its massive oil and gas contracts in the Gulf, its infrastructure corridors spreading across Asia, these are not isolated ventures. They are pieces of a coherent, interconnected economic system that is taking shape before our eyes. The question is not whether this will matter, it already matters. The only real question now is how far it will go, and what it will mean for the future of American power. In Kuala Lumpur, history may have reached a turning point. China did not just host another round of meetings. It pulled together ASEAN states, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and itself into one shared platform. On the surface, it could be mistaken for another regional summit, but underneath, it marked the foundation of something much larger. A new economic bloc capable of shifting the world's center of gravity away from the West. The numbers are staggering. Collectively, this group commands a GDP exceeding $25 trillion and represents more than 2 billion human beings. This is not a vision for the distant future. It is the reality of the present moment. These nations already generate more than 55% of global economic growth, making them the true engine of the world economy. If they begin coordinating not just trade policies but energy strategies, investment flows, and technological standards, then the momentum they create will be something even the most established powers will have no choice but to reckon with. BRICS once symbolized an alternative, but compared to this new coalition, it now appears modest, even limited. Internal contradictions have slowed BRICS for years. India and China's tensions, Brazil's political instability, Russia's isolation. By contrast, this new bloc is being built on practical, shared interests. It is linked by trade routes, anchored in energy flows, and reinforced by investment corridors that already exist and are expanding. This is not a stage for empty speeches. It is the outline of a parallel system, one where supply chains, currencies, settlements, and infrastructure function outside the control of Washington and Brussels. That is why the Kuala Lumpur gathering mattered so much. It was not about rhetoric. It was about sending a clear message. The Global South is no longer content to remain a passive audience in global affairs. It is ready to act as a unified force. And the more it acts together, the more the traditional influence of the United States visibly declines. While this alliance was being forged, Washington was consumed with its own domestic disputes. America is still, on paper, the world's largest economy, but its ability to set the rules of the game in global trade is fading. Allies that once depended almost entirely on U.S. trade are now diversifying, seeking alternatives, and building new relationships. The European Union has deepened its trade agreements with Mercosur and South America. Vietnam has signed deals with both the EU and Canada to diversify its exports. Japan and South Korea, long considered unwavering security partners of the United States, are steadily expanding their ties across Asia in ways that reduce dependence on Washington. Each of these moves might look small on its own, but together, they steadily chip away at the centrality of the U.S. in the global economic order. The message is unmistakable. When Washington relies on tariffs as its main instrument of policy, it forces its partners to look elsewhere, and most of the alternatives lead directly to Beijing. America's inward turn has created a vacuum, and that vacuum is being filled with remarkable speed. Nowhere is this transformation clearer than in Southeast Asia, the very region where China's influence is advancing most visibly. Consider Indonesia. For years, Jakarta balanced between Washington and Beijing. It relied heavily on trade with the United States. But after repeated rounds of tariffs, those ties began to erode. In April, Washington imposed a 10% duty on a wide range of goods. Within weeks, Indonesia's trade surplus collapsed. By May, it had fallen to just $160 million, the lowest level in 5 years. At the same time, imports of equipment and machinery from China and Singapore surged by more than 20%. What looks like a small data point on a chart is, in fact, the clearest evidence of a larger pattern. Southeast Asia is turning toward Beijing, not because of ideology, but because of necessity. When Washington closes a door, China opens another, wider and more profitable. This is the pattern repeating across the world. The global South reshaping its alliances, old dependencies being broken, new systems being built, and American influence gradually eroding. What began in Kuala Lumpur is more than a diplomatic event. It may be remembered as the moment when the center of gravity in global economics and politics began shifting decisively away from Washington and toward a new axis of power led by Beijing. The story is not complicated, but its consequences are enormous. Once the U.S. market closes its doors, countries like Indonesia immediately begin searching for new paths, and the first gateway that opens almost inevitably leads to Beijing. This isn't accidental. It is the result of years of economic friction, shifting alliances, and Washington's own policies that are forcing nations to adapt. Vietnam, for instance, felt this reality when the Trump administration doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum to 50%. Practically overnight, Vietnam's steel exports to the United States collapsed, falling by 27% in the first months of 2025. For a nation whose economic lifeline depends heavily on exports, this was not just a setback, it was a shock that threatened growth itself. And yet Hanoi refused to remain paralyzed. Instead of retreating, it turned decisively toward China and other regional partners. The numbers speak more loudly than speeches. In 2024, Asian trade with China soared to $982 billion, nearly one-fifth of the continent's total trade, and fresh data from 2025 shows this figure is rising even faster. The revamped Asian-China Free Trade Agreement isn't just about lower tariffs on traditional goods, it is deliberately targeting the industries that will dominate the future: digital services, renewable energy, and smart manufacturing. This agreement is not a hollow political gesture, it is producing tangible results. We can see it in projects that transform the landscape. The Asian Express cargo line now connects Malaysia with Chongqing, slashing delivery times for manufacturers and linking supply chains more tightly into China's industrial heartland. In Indonesia, the $7 billion high-speed rail project connecting Jakarta and Bandung, built under the Belt and Road Initiative, has already carried over 9 million passengers since its late 2023 launch, becoming a symbol of Beijing's growing influence. These are not isolated projects, they are threads in a much larger fabric weaving Southeast Asia deeper into China's orbit. A new trade map is emerging, and ASEAN is no longer a loose group of small economies caught between global powers. It is becoming the workshop of China, an investment magnet, and a crucial gateway into worldwide supply chains. This transformation is not just about money, it is about power. And with every factory built, every port expanded, and every rail line connected, the balance of power shifts further east. The transformation doesn't stop with trade. It stretches into energy, infrastructure, and the very veins through which global commerce flows. In Malaysia, the expansion of Kuantan Port with Chinese financing has doubled its capacity, making it the largest hub for transshipment of iron ore and industrial goods in the region. In Indonesia, brand new cargo terminals are being constructed to handle a flood of containers that once moved along Western-dominated sea routes. These ports are not neutral facilities, they're choke points, redirections, instruments of strategy. They are locking Southeast Asia into an Asia-centered system and creating alternatives that simply did not exist a decade ago. Energy follows the same path. For most of the modern era, Washington enjoyed unparalleled power because oil was priced in US dollars. That system gave America leverage over the world. But that dominance is now eroding. Roughly 30% of Saudi oil shipments are already being traded in currencies other than the dollar, and the share is expected to grow. In 2023, China and France's Total Energies completed the very first liquefied natural gas deal denominated in yuan. The symbolism was unmistakable. Even Western corporations are quietly preparing for a future where the dollar is no longer the unquestioned ruler of global energy. Then there are renewables, perhaps the clearest signal of who is shaping tomorrow's energy order. China manufactures nearly 80% of the world's solar panels, dominates wind turbine exports, and maintains control over the global battery supply chain. The meaning is simple. Whether the world runs on oil, natural gas, or clean energy, Beijing sits at the center. Energy diversification is not merely changing sources, it is changing the entire structure of power. And while Asia is busy constructing new networks, the Gulf states are pivoting in the same direction. For decades, the Gulf Cooperation Council was bound tightly to Washington, both for security and for its energy sales. But now the ties are loosening. A deliberate pivot is underway. Trade between the Gulf and ASEAN already hit $130 billion in 2023, with a target of $180 billion by 2032. And unlike in the past, this trade is not limited to oil and gas. Gulf investors are pouring billions into artificial intelligence, digital finance, and renewable energy, sectors where China and Southeast Asia already lead. Politics mirror these economic shifts. At the Kuala Lumpur summit, Indonesia's president did not hesitate to publicly align with Beijing's call against external domination and even voiced strong support for Palestine. This message resonated deeply among Gulf leaders, signaling that Asian and Arab voices are beginning to move in unison. The symbolism is powerful. It is no longer only about trade deals. It is about political solidarity against a system that for decades has been dominated by the West. What once seemed to be the challenge of BRICS alone has evolved into something larger and potentially more consequential. From Jakarta to Riyadh, a new network is being forged, one that does not wait for permission or inclusion in Western-designed institutions. Instead, it builds its own rules, its own frameworks, and its own vision for the future. This network could soon rival, perhaps even replace, the system born after the Second World War. And the most remarkable part? The shift is unfolding far faster than most analysts predicted. What began as trade agreements has transformed into a sprawling economic and political bloc with the ability to operate independently of the United States and its allies. For Washington, this is not a minor setback, it is a strategic earthquake. It is the first undeniable sign that the post-war order, once considered unbreakable, is dissolving right before our eyes. The question is no longer if a new order will rise. It is how much of the world it will pull into its orbit, and how fast it will redraw the map of global power. Subscribe and stay with us as we follow this transformation step by step, because history is not happening in books. It is unfolding right now, in real time, across Asia and the Middle East.